I've always loved hiking alone. There's something about being in the middle of nowhere, away from people and noise, that clears my head. I don't do it for the views or the exercise. I do it because I need space. I'm not the kind of person who does group hikes or trail selfies. I like being far away from everything. That's why I picked this trail. It was in a remote area in the northern part of the state, about 5 hours from my place. I found it by accident while scanning some old hiking forums. It didn't have a name, just coordinates. Some guy mentioned it years ago, said it was brutal and barely marked, but if you followed the river upstream for 2 days, you'd reach a cliff with a view that made you forget your own name. I liked that. It wasn't a tourist trail. It wasn't in any app or guidebook. It felt like the right place to disappear for a while. I parked my truck near a dirt road that led off the highway. The road was cracked and mostly grown over, like no one had used it in years. I left a note in my glove box just in case, my name, the date, and a rough outline of where I was going. I packed 3 days worth of food, a tent, a water filter, first aid, a knife, and a small hatchet. I brought a printed map from an old topographical survey that barely showed anything useful. That was fine. I didn't want easy. The first few hours were peaceful. I followed the edge of the river, which curved and twisted through thick woods. The water was clear, and the sound helped keep me focused. The trees were dense and tall, blocking most of the sun. I liked that too. It felt like the kind of place people didn't belong. Just walking, listening to the river, watching my steps. Every now and then, I'd find signs of an old trail. Stones arranged like steps, half-rotted logs placed like makeshift bridges, but they were worn down and covered in moss. It didn't look like anyone had been out here in years. I kept pushing deeper. No cell service, no signs of people, just trees, river, rocks. The first night, I camped on a small flat patch of dirt by the water. I pitched the tent, ate a cold dinner, and sat with my back against a tree until it got too dark to see. Then I went inside, zipped up, and lay in my sleeping bag listening to the river until I fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound I didn't expect. It was a dry, snapping sound, like something heavy stepping on a branch. Not once, but a few times. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't turn on my flashlight. I just stayed still and listened. I've camped enough to know animals come around at night, but this felt different. The steps weren't random. They came slowly, one at a time, closer to the tent, then stopped. No sniffing, no scurrying, just a presence. After a minute, I heard the river again and nothing else. I told myself it was a deer or something like that. I tried to sleep but kept the knife under my hand just in case. The next day, I kept moving. I didn't think much about it. I figured I was just on edge from being so far out. The trail was steeper now. The trees got tighter, more roots underfoot. I kept having to climb over fallen trunks. I lost the river a few times but found it again by listening for the sound of water. The terrain got rougher. Sometimes I had to crawl. I slipped once and cut my hand on a rock, but it wasn't deep. I made good progress, though. Around mid-afternoon, I found a ridge above the river. I climbed it to get a better view. From up there, I could see the water curving through the woods and disappearing into the hills. I also noticed something strange. There was a shape in the trees across the river. At first, I thought it was a stump, but it looked out of place. It was too square. I pulled out my binoculars and looked closer. It was a shack, an old one, half collapsed, with a rusted tin roof and one wall leaning in like it was ready to fall. There was no path to it, no clearing, just trees and brush. It didn't look lived in, but it made me uneasy. I don't know why. Just seeing something man-made way out here felt wrong, like it had no business being there. I didn't go near it. I went the other way, higher into the hills. By the time the sun started to drop, I found a flat spot between two boulders. I set up camp there. I kept the fire small and low. I ate, drank, and watched the woods until it got dark. I felt watched again. I couldn't explain it. There was no sound, no movement, just this creeping sense like someone was waiting for me to fall asleep. That night, I didn't sleep much. Around 2 a.m., I heard something again. It wasn't steps this time. It was a scraping sound. Slow, steady, like metal dragging across stone. Then it stopped. Then it happened again from a different direction. I held my breath, listening. It went quiet after that. I stayed awake until the sun came up. I thought about turning back. I really did, but I was too far in, and the trail ahead looked easier. I told myself I was just tired, paranoid. I kept hiking. The forest started changing. The trees got thinner, shorter. The underbrush turned into thorny patches, and the trail got muddy. I walked for hours and didn't see anything except birds and squirrels. Then, near noon, I found something that made my stomach turn. It was a boot, just one, covered in dried mud, laces torn. It was half buried under leaves. It didn't look like it had been there long. The leather wasn't cracked or rotten. I stood there staring at it for a long time. Then I picked it up and checked inside. No bugs, no mold. It looked fresh. I dropped it and walked on fast. Every sound started to bother me. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept looking behind me. I didn't eat that day. I just drank water and kept moving. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Late that afternoon, I heard the river again. It had widened and slowed. I followed it until I saw the cliff, the one from the old forum post. It rose out of the trees like a stone wall. I had to climb partway to get to the ledge. When I did, I saw the view. It really was beautiful. You could see miles of forest, untouched, green and endless. But I couldn't enjoy it. I felt sick. I had this cold pressure in my chest, like I shouldn't be here. I dropped my pack and sat down to breathe. That's when I noticed the ashes. They were in a shallow pit, just a few feet from the edge. Old ashes, gray and scattered. Someone had built a fire here. Not long ago, maybe weeks. I checked around and found a crumpled energy bar wrapper, the kind I carried. I wasn't alone out here. Someone else had come this far. Or maybe they never left. I didn't camp there. Couldn't. I grabbed my stuff and started back down. I didn't want to be near the ashes. I didn't want to think about who left them. I hiked until it was almost dark and set up camp in a hollow near a stream. I made no fire. I ate nothing. I just sat there, knife in hand, listening to the woods close in around me. That night was the worst. Around midnight, I heard it again, scraping. Then a thump, like something dropping onto the ground. Then silence. Then footsteps, slow and heavy. I stayed in my tent, breathing shallow. Then I heard something brush against the fabric. Just a light touch, like fingers. I nearly screamed, but I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just waited. It went quiet again. Minutes passed. Hours maybe. I don't know. Eventually I heard the stream again and nothing else. In the morning I found tracks. Bare feet. Human. Large. White. Deep impressions in the mud outside the tent. They circled it once, then walked away into the woods. I followed them for a few minutes, then stopped. I didn't want to know where they led. I turned around and packed everything as fast as I could. I hiked back in a panic. No breaks, no food, just water and movement. My legs burned. My lungs hurt, but I didn't stop. I reached the first campsite by the river by late afternoon. I didn't even look around. I kept going. I hiked past dark, using my headlamp until it died. Then I stumbled by moonlight. My knees were scraped, my arms cut from branches. I made it back to the truck the next morning. I was shaking. I barely slept. I sat in the driver's seat for almost an hour before starting the engine. Then I drove, not stopping until I hit the highway. I never reported it. What would I say? That I found a boot? Heard footsteps? Saw footprints? There was no proof, no names, just a feeling that someone else was out there. I haven't gone hiking alone since. I still love the woods, the quiet, the space, but I can't forget the sound of something brushing against my tent. I can't forget the prints outside, or the way that Shaq looked through the trees like it was watching. I think someone lives out there, maybe more than one. Maybe they don't like visitors, or maybe they do. Either way, I won't be going back. It started as a regular weekend hike, something I'd done dozens of times before. I was looking to clear my head, get some fresh air, and maybe challenge myself a bit. I chose a trail I hadn't done before, the Ridge Trail, because it looked quiet and remote. It was marked moderate to hard, with a steep ascent and narrow ridgelines. But the weather was good and I had all day. I had water, snacks, a basic first aid kit, a paper map, my phone, a compass, and a small flashlight in my pack. I left early in the morning, parked my car at the trailhead, and started walking into the trees. The first few hours were peaceful. Birds chirped in the trees. Sunlight came through the leaves in soft rays. The air was still cool from the night. The path climbed slowly, winding up the side of the mountain. I passed a creek, stepped over roots and rocks, and enjoyed the solitude. I didn't see anyone else on the trail, but that didn't worry me. I liked being alone in the woods. After a while, the trail started to get harder. The incline steepened, and the dirt turned to loose gravel in some spots. I had to watch my footing. One wrong step and I could twist an ankle. The trees thinned out as I gained elevation. I stopped for water at a large flat rock overlooking a valley. The view was stunning, layers of green hills stretching out under a pale blue sky. I stayed there for maybe 15 minutes, eating a granola bar and enjoying the silence. Then I packed up and kept going. I reached the ridgeline around midday. The trail here was narrower than I expected. On one side, the land dropped steeply into forest. On the other, it sloped down to a rocky basin. There was barely room to walk in some places. I took my time, placing each step carefully. The wind had picked up too, and I had to lean into it to stay balanced. I remember thinking that it would be a really bad place to fall. The path along the ridge was longer than I thought. I kept checking my map, but it was hard to tell exactly where I was because the trail wasn't clearly marked up there. There were cairns, stacks of rocks left by other hikers, but they were spaced out and sometimes hard to spot. I followed them anyway, assuming they were part of the main trail. After another hour, the terrain started to change. The dirt path gave way to more rocky sections, and the trees completely disappeared. It was just scrubby brush and boulders. The wind was stronger, and the sun was beating down hard. I could feel sweat soaking through my shirt, and my legs were getting sore. I told myself I'd find a place to stop soon and rest before heading back. That's when I took a wrong turn. I didn't realize it at first. The trail seemed to keep going, and there were faint boot prints in the dirt, which made me think others had gone that way. But after 20 minutes, I noticed there were no more cairns. The path had narrowed again, and I was now walking along the side of a steep slope. When I looked around, nothing looked familiar. I checked my map, but it wasn't helpful. The topographic lines were close together, meaning steep terrain, but it didn't show the side trail I was on. I considered turning back, but the way I came had looked the same for a while, and I wasn't sure I could find the exact spot I left the main trail. I figured if I kept going forward, I might loop back onto the right path. That was a mistake. The trail became harder to follow. It wasn't really a trail anymore, just a series of flat spots and worn areas between bushes. I had to push through low branches and climb over rocks. I was getting tired and frustrated. The sun was lower now, and I realized I'd lost track of time. I checked my phone for GPS, but there was no signal. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I was alone, off trail with no cell service, and I didn't know exactly where I was. I still had water and some food, but I was wasting daylight. I tried to backtrack, but everything looked the same. The brush was thick and tangled, and I kept walking in circles without realizing it. I started marking the trees with small scratches from a rock to keep track, but even then, I wasn't sure it was helping. The terrain grew rougher. I had to slide down loose dirt to reach lower ground. At one point, I lost my footing and fell onto my side, scraping my forearm and bruising my hip. Nothing broke, but it shook me. I sat there for a minute, heart racing, dust in my mouth, and stared up at the sky. It was turning orange. I was running out of light. I knew I had to find a safe place to stop for the night. There was no way I could hike back through that terrain in the dark. I hadn't brought a tent, just a light emergency blanket and the clothes I was wearing. I looked for a flat spot, somewhere sheltered from the wind. I found a shallow depression between two large boulders, just wide enough to lie down in. I cleared the area of rocks and sticks and sat down to eat a little trail mix. I didn't feel hungry, but I knew I needed the energy. As night fell, the wind got colder. I wrapped the blanket around myself and curled up between the rocks. I could see the stars come out one by one. The sky was clear, but the silence was different now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, put me on edge. I kept thinking something was moving out there. I didn't sleep much. I dozed off now and then, waking up every time I heard something new. By morning, my body ached from the cold and the hard ground. I was stiff, dirty, and more tired than when I lay down. But I knew I had to keep moving. I drank the last of my water and packed up. My plan was simple: head downhill. Water flows down, and trails usually run near streams. If I could find water, I might find a way back. I started walking again, trying to stay in a straight line. I used the sun to keep a general sense of direction. The terrain was steep and uneven. I had to slide on my backside more than once. Branches whipped at my face, and thorny plants tore at my legs. After an hour or two, I found a dry creek bed and followed it downhill. It was slow going. The rocks were slippery, and the banks were high in some places, but it was better than bushwhacking through dense forest. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted and badly dehydrated. I hadn't found any water yet. My mouth was dry, and my head was starting to throb. I was starting to worry about heat stroke. I sat under a tree for a while, trying to cool down, but I could feel my body starting to give out. I thought about staying put and waiting for help, but I had no way of signaling anyone. I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was going, only that I'd be hiking that day. That was another mistake. Then, finally, I heard it, a faint trickle of water. It was coming from somewhere to my left, beyond a thick patch of brush. I forced my way through it and found a small spring feeding into a shallow stream. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I dropped to my knees and drank straight from the water. I didn't care about filtering it, I just needed it. After I drank, I splashed water on my face and arms and felt a little bit of life come back into me. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead somewhere. It wound through the forest, getting wider as it went. After another hour, I found a trail. A real, maintained trail with a signpost and everything. I almost cried. I had no idea which trail it was, but it didn't matter. I followed it downhill. A couple miles later, I reached a dirt road. I was sunburned, scratched, and limping, but I made it. A pickup truck passed by not long after and stopped when they saw me. The driver took one look at me and told me to get in. He gave me water, a snack, and a ride back to the trailhead where my car was still parked. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home, just sitting there in silence. The shock was starting to wear off, and the exhaustion hit me like a wave. My hands were shaking. My arms were covered in scrapes. My clothes were filthy, but I was okay. I had made it out. That night, after a hot shower and a real meal, I lay in bed and thought about everything that had happened. How quickly a peaceful hike turned into a survival situation. How one wrong turn changed everything. I wasn't angry or scared anymore. I just felt deeply, quietly grateful. I learned the hard way that nature doesn't care how confident you are. It doesn't give warnings. It just is beautiful, wild, and unforgiving. I still hike now, but I prepare better. I tell people where I'm going. I carry a GPS beacon. I study maps more carefully. I never assume I know enough. That day on the ridge taught me that being experienced doesn't make you invincible. It just means you've been lucky so far. And I was lucky. So lucky. Lucky to walk out of those woods alive. I had been planning this hike for a while. I needed a break from everything: work, people, city noise. I live in a small apartment, always surrounded by the buzz of traffic and the hum of machines. I wanted silence, real silence, the kind you only find deep in the woods. I picked a trail I hadn't done before, one that wasn't too popular, didn't have many reviews, and ran through a thick forest up in the northern part of the state. It looked peaceful on the map, surrounded by trees and hills, far from any towns. Perfect place to clear my head. The trail was called East Ridge Loop. According to the map, it made a wide loop over a series of hills, then circled back down to the parking area. About 17 miles total. I figured I could start early, hike up, set up camp somewhere at the top, and finish the loop the next day. I brought a small tent, sleeping bag, water filter, dry food, and a power bank for my phone. I wasn't expecting any signal, but I kept it just in case I needed to take pictures or use the offline map. I arrived around 6 in the morning. The parking lot was empty except for one other car. It was still cold, and a thin layer of fog floated just above the ground. Everything smelled like wet leaves and pine. I locked my car, hoisted my pack, and started walking. The first few miles were nice. The trail was clear and well-marked with blue blazes on the trees. It wound through thick woods, past mossy rocks and fallen trees. I didn't hear much, just the crunch of my boots on the dirt and the occasional chirp of a bird. No one else in sight. Felt good to be alone, like I had the whole forest to myself. About 5 miles in, I reached a small stream. I filled one of my bottles and filtered the water, then sat down on a rock to rest. As I looked around, I noticed the trail forked just past the stream. There were 2 paths. One continued straight, marked with the blue blaze, and the other veered off to the right, unmarked. I wasn't in a hurry, and I had time, so I walked a little down the unmarked path just out of curiosity. It wasn't much of a trail, just a narrow strip of dirt between the trees, but it looked like people had walked it before. The underbrush was trampled, and there were a few boot prints in the mud. I followed it for a few minutes, thinking maybe it led to a viewpoint or an old campsite. I kept checking behind me, trying to remember the turns so I could find my way back. After maybe 15 minutes of walking, the path opened into a small clearing. It was quiet there, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring. I looked around. There were no signs of life, no birds, no wind, not even the sound of branches creaking, just stillness. In the middle of the clearing was a rusted metal barrel. It looked like it had been used as a fire pit, but it was old and half buried in the ground. There were some broken beer bottles around it, a couple crushed cans, and what looked like an old sleeping bag stuffed into a torn backpack. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something about the place felt wrong. I didn't want to hang around long. I turned back the way I came, moving faster now, retracing my steps. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Nothing behind me, but I still felt like I was being watched. I got back to the main trail and kept moving. I told myself I was just spooking myself. It was probably just an old camp from years ago. Maybe someone came out here to drink and left their junk behind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. As I climbed higher into the hills, the forest started to change. The trees grew closer together, taller, darker. The trail was less maintained here. Some of the blue blazes were faded or missing. I checked my offline map a few times to make sure I was still on track. Around noon, I stopped to eat a granola bar and drink some water. That's when I realized I hadn't seen another person all day. Not even footprints. Not even birds since that clearing. I pressed on, trying to make it to the top of the ridge before evening. The trail got steeper and more narrow. I had to scramble over some loose rocks and duck under fallen branches. Finally, around 4, I reached the top. There wasn't much of a view. The trees were too thick, but I found a flat spot just off the trail and set up camp. I made sure everything was secure, then sat against a tree and ate dinner out of a pouch. The silence was still bothering me. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the faint sound of my own breathing. I went to bed early. It was already getting dark, and I didn't feel like sitting around in the silence any longer. I zipped up the tent and tried to sleep. First, I couldn't. I kept thinking about that clearing. I kept hearing tiny noises outside the tent. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. But when I looked out with my flashlight, I saw nothing. Somewhere around midnight, I finally drifted off. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not animals, human. Slow, steady, crunching in the dry leaves. They were maybe 30 feet from the tent, moving past me. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so loud I thought whoever was out there would hear it. I didn't dare move. I lay perfectly still, listening. The steps paused for a few seconds. Then they continued, heading off into the trees. I waited a long time before I unzipped the tent just a crack and peeked out. I didn't see anyone. No flashlight, no movement. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. Those footsteps were real. I stayed awake the rest of the night. The first light, I packed up fast. I didn't eat breakfast. I just wanted to get off that ridge and back to my car. I followed the trail down the other side of the loop, trying to move quickly but carefully. The path was more overgrown on this side. It felt like no one had hiked this section in months. I tripped over roots and had to push through thorn bushes. I kept looking behind me, but the woods were still empty. About 3 miles from the end of the trail, I came across something that stopped me cold. There was a small wooden structure just off the trail. It looked like a hunting blind, but older. Rotting wood, broken windows, no door. Just 4 walls and a roof. I didn't want to get near it, but I couldn't help myself. I stepped closer and looked inside. There was a mattress on the floor. Dirty, torn, covered in stains. Next to it was a pile of old clothes and a plastic bucket. On the far wall, scratched into the wood, were dozens of tally marks. Some lines crossed out, some circled. I backed away slowly. That thing was too far from any town, too deep in the woods. Whoever stayed there didn't want to be found. And they were still here. I was sure of it now. That person walking past my tent. They weren't just another hiker. They had a reason to be out here. Maybe they lived in that shack. Maybe they'd seen me. Maybe they were following me. I didn't run, but I walked as fast as I could without making too much noise. I stopped using the map. I didn't want to take out my phone. Didn't want any sound. I just kept moving. I didn't eat.
He barely drank.
My only goal was to get back to my car. When I finally saw the parking lot through the trees, I almost cried. My legs were shaking. My back hurt from the pack. My clothes were soaked with sweat. But I was so close. Then I saw something that made me freeze again. The other car was gone. That old blue Subaru that had been there when I arrived. It wasn't there anymore, which meant the person who owned it had left. But I never saw them. Not on the trail. Not at the top. No footprints either. Maybe they were out there the whole time, just watching. I got in my car and locked the doors. I started the engine and drove. Fast. Not stopping until I hit a gas station an hour away. I sat there for a while, just breathing, watching people come and go. Felt like I was back in the world again. I don't hike alone anymore. Not after that. It wasn't a ghost or a monster or anything from a storybook. It was just a person. A real person, out there in the woods, living in some broken down shack, walking past tents in the middle of the night. Maybe they were harmless. Maybe they were just surviving. But maybe they weren't. Either way, I'm not going back there. Ever. I've always liked hiking alone. It's quiet, clears my head. I've never been a fan of crowds or small talk, and being out in the woods by myself feels like the one place where I don't have to think about anything but the ground in front of me and the sound of the wind through the trees. I've done hundreds of solo hikes in my life. Mountains, forests, deserts, you name it. So when I found this new trail online, something barely known and not marked on any official map, I felt a little spark of excitement I hadn't felt in a while. The post said it was called North Basin Ridge. It was tucked deep inside a national forest, about 5 hours from where I lived. The person who posted about it said it wasn't for beginners. Steep parts, unmarked sections, and only accessible by a rough Forest Service road. But the views were worth it. I had a free weekend coming up, and I figured, why not? I packed light but smart. Map, compass, GPS, enough food for 3 days even though I only planned to stay out 2. I brought water filters, a satellite communicator, a knife, extra batteries, layers of clothes. I've done this enough times to know what happens when people think nothing can go wrong. The plan was simple. Start early Friday morning, hike the ridge out about 10 miles, camp overnight, then loop back on a slightly different route Saturday and drive home Sunday. That was the plan anyway. The first few miles weren't bad. The forest was quiet and peaceful. The air smelled of pine and earth. Birds chirped, small animals rustled in the undergrowth, and everything felt normal. The path was narrow and obviously not maintained, but I could follow it easily enough. I passed a couple old trail markers nailed to trees, faded and worn down by time. That was the only sign this place had ever been used much. Around mile 6, the path started getting steeper. The ridge rose fast, and the dirt turned to rock. I had to climb with my hands in a few places. I paused to catch my breath and looked out. The view really was incredible. Endless green forest stretched out below me, with no signs of people, buildings, or roads, just wilderness in every direction. It made me feel small in the best way. I pushed on another couple miles before I started to notice something felt off. It wasn't anything I could see or hear, just a sense in my gut that made me stop and stand still for a minute. I looked around. The trail had almost vanished beneath my feet, turned into broken patches of ground and scattered stones. No signs, no markers. I checked my GPS and it still showed me on the trail more or less. I figured it was just an unmaintained part and kept going. By the time I hit mile 10, it was late afternoon. I picked a spot off the ridge, down a small slope surrounded by trees and brush, where I could set up camp. I boiled some water, made dinner, and sat quietly while the sky went dark. The stars came out, brighter than I'd seen in a long time. No city light to dull them. I crawled into my sleeping bag and let the night take me. I woke up just before sunrise, not to any noise, but because I was cold. My sleeping bag was zipped tight, and I had my jacket on, but I was shivering. It was early spring, and temps could drop fast, but this was colder than I expected. I got up and started moving to warm myself. When the sun came up, I noticed frost on the edges of my tarp shelter and across the brush. Strange for that time of year, but not impossible, especially up in the higher ridges. I packed up and decided to take the loop trail back. My GPS showed a small connector that would lead me along a more eastern path back toward the start. I started hiking, but within a couple hours, I hit my first real problem. The trail disappeared completely. Not just overgrown, but gone, like it had never been there at all. I pulled out my compass and adjusted, trying to stay east. The ground here was rougher, with fallen trees and thick underbrush. I moved slower, climbing over logs and ducking under branches. I started to worry about twisting an ankle or worse. I kept going for another few hours, stopping only to snack and check my bearings. But every time I thought I was getting closer to where the trail should be, it kept leading me further into the woods. That's when I started to think I'd taken a wrong turn. I sat down and pulled out the map, but it didn't help much. The ridge wasn't marked clearly, and the unmarked trail I'd followed wasn't official to begin with. I tried retracing my steps, but the forest didn't look familiar anymore. Trees that should have stood out didn't. Rocks I thought I'd passed were gone. I kept looking for my boot prints from the day before, but the ground was too hard in places and too soft in others. Everything started to blur together. I climbed a tree at one point, trying to get above the canopy and spot the ridge, but all I could see were endless trees stretching in every direction. No ridge, no landmarks, no cell signal. I came back down and told myself not to panic. I still had food and water. I could hunker down and try again in the morning. I found a relatively flat spot and made camp, but my hands were shaking as I set up. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound in the dark felt sharper, closer. The third morning, I ate sparingly and packed up early. I wanted to conserve my supplies. I started hiking again, trying to head northwest, hoping to hit the original trail I came in on. The woods got thicker. I started seeing animal tracks, some deer, maybe a bobcat, and what I thought might have been bear. I kept my bear spray close and made noise as I moved. The last thing I needed was a surprise encounter. By late afternoon, I felt the weight of the forest pressing in on me. My legs ached, and my shoulders were sore from the pack. I stopped to drink from a small stream and refill my bottles. I almost missed it. A torn piece of blue fabric snagged on a low branch. I froze. It wasn't mine. I hadn't worn anything blue. I walked closer and found more signs. An old sock, half buried in mud, and a faded food wrapper stuck to a tree root. Someone else had been out here, but I didn't know if they made it back. I kept going, following what looked like a faint path, maybe where someone had walked years ago. The prints were old, barely visible, but they gave me hope. I followed that for hours until the sun started dropping. I thought I saw a break in the trees up ahead, a faint line of sky that didn't look like more forest. I pushed toward it with everything I had left. My feet were blistered, and I hadn't eaten in hours. I broke through the brush and found myself staring at a narrow dirt road, just wide enough for a service truck. I almost cried. It was overgrown and clearly unused, but it was a road. I followed it for miles until I found a junction with a metal sign, rusted and dented but readable. It had a number, something I could use to figure out where I was. I checked my GPS again, and this time I had a bar of signal. I sent a ping to my emergency contact and marked my location. Then I sat down and waited. A ranger truck found me just after dark. The driver looked surprised. He said they didn't patrol this area often. I told him I'd gotten lost off North Basin Ridge. He didn't say much after that, just nodded slowly like he'd heard the name before but didn't like it. They drove me back to the ranger station, gave me water and checked me over. I was sore, hungry, and dirty, but I was okay. I got back to my car the next day and drove home in silence, thinking about how fast things had gone sideways. Since then, I've stuck to official trails. I still hike alone, but I research more. I ask around. I don't trust vague online posts. That ridge isn't on any map for a reason. I wasn't the first person to get lost out there, and I probably won't be the last. But I was one of the lucky ones who made it back. I've done a lot of solo hiking trips over the years. I always liked the quiet. Something about walking for miles with nothing but the sound of my boots crunching on dirt made everything feel simple. No emails, no phones, just the trail and my pack. It was always about disconnecting and testing myself. I never went looking for trouble, but that doesn't mean it won't find you. This trip was supposed to be a 4-day loop through the mountains in the northern part of the state. It wasn't a well-known trail, but it wasn't completely remote either. A few scattered blogs mentioned it. Some said it was rough and overgrown. That sounded perfect to me. I'd packed enough food and water for 5 days just in case and had all my gear in good shape. Compass, map, GPS, knife, first aid, emergency beacon, extra socks. Everything was checked twice. I wasn't careless. I never had been. The first day was calm. I parked at a small trailhead just off a gravel road. Only one other car was there. I remember noting the mud-caked tires and a bumper sticker about climbing. I figured someone else was doing the loop, maybe in the other direction. I didn't expect to see them, and I didn't care to. The forest was quiet, and the late morning sun filtered through pine branches as I made my way up a gentle incline. Birds chirped. The breeze was cool. Everything felt right. By the time I made camp that night, I'd covered about 12 miles. The trail was narrow in spots and poorly marked in others, but I had the map and had kept track of the terrain. My feet were sore, but nothing unusual. I found a flat patch near a shallow creek and pitched my tent, ate some jerky, and boiled water for coffee. As night fell, the cold came in faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and drifted off listening to the wind push through the trees. On day 2, I woke up early. My body was stiff, and I had a strange feeling in my gut, like I'd eaten something off, but I brushed it off. Maybe the cold had just gotten to me. After some oatmeal and a stretch, I packed up and moved on. The trail was steeper now, switchbacks climbing along a rocky ridge. I kept checking my map and GPS, and everything lined up. Still, there was something nagging at me, a rustling sound off in the woods here and there. Maybe a deer, or a fox. I told myself not to worry. That was normal out here. About halfway through the day, I found something that made me stop. A small clearing to the side of the trail, barely noticeable unless you were really looking. And in it, a torn-up tent. Faded blue, maybe a few years old, collapsed in on itself. I stepped closer. The fabric was ripped in a few spots, and there was debris around it. An old water bottle, a shoe half buried in leaves, some broken pieces of plastic that might have been a flashlight. No sign of people, though. No blood. No bones, just abandoned. Could have been from someone who got tired of carrying too much and dumped gear. Or maybe someone who got caught in a storm. Still, it didn't sit right with me. I snapped a photo with my phone and marked the coordinates just in case. Then I kept moving. The trail got rougher after that. More overgrowth, less obvious markings. I followed the topography and made camp near a high ridge with a good view of the valley below. That night was different. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something. Not footsteps exactly, just distant snapping, like someone stepping on twigs now and then, far off but close enough to notice. I lay still for hours, hand resting on my knife inside my sleeping bag, barely breathing. I told myself it was paranoia, too much caffeine. Maybe that broken tent had gotten into my head. But even when I did sleep, it was shallow. When I woke up the next morning, I was more tired than when I'd gone to bed. Day 3 started with heavy fog. I broke camp in silence. No oatmeal, just a granola bar and water. The trail had faded almost completely now. I used my compass to cut across a small ravine just like the map showed. There was supposed to be a side trail that cut back up to the ridge on the other side, but I couldn't find it. Just dense brush and twisted trees. I pushed through slowly, sweating even though it was cold. My jacket got caught on a branch, and I cursed under my breath. After 2 hours of bushwhacking, I found something that made my stomach drop. Another campsite. This one looked more recent. The fire ring was still black with ash, and there were scraps of burnt wood. A plastic wrapper was stuck to a rock, and a rolled-up sleeping pad leaned against a tree. No tent this time, no bag, no people, just more signs of someone being here and leaving in a hurry. I looked around for footprints, but the ground was too hard and the leaves too thick. I stood still for a while, listening. Nothing. I moved on faster than before. My goal was to make it to the small lake on the far side of the loop by nightfall. That would put me in range of finishing the trail the next day. But the deeper I went, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. It's hard to describe. There were no clear signs, no voices, just that prickling feeling on the back of your neck when you know something's watching you. At one point, I stopped to drink and check the map. That's when I noticed it, a shape behind a tree. Not close, maybe 30 yards off, just a flash of movement. I looked up fast. Nothing. Could have been a squirrel or a bird, but I waited. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, scanning the trees. Still nothing. I put my map away and kept going, but I picked up the pace. I reached the lake just before dusk. The water was still and black, surrounded by thick pine. It should have been beautiful, but I couldn't enjoy it. I kept turning around every few minutes. I didn't make a fire, just ate cold food and crawled into my tent with my knife. I kept the GPS unit clipped to my belt. The emergency beacon was next to my pillow. That night, I heard footsteps, not far off, not loud, but real. I know what animals sound like. These weren't fast or light. They were slow, deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch, then nothing. I lay there, not breathing, barely blinking. I didn't move a muscle for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I fell asleep from exhaustion. In the morning, I found boot prints near the edge of the lake. Not mine. They were deeper, wider, maybe from someone bigger. I followed them for a bit and they just stopped. No turnoff, no trail, just ended in the moss. That's when I decided to leave the loop early. There was a shortcut marked on the map that cut down through a narrow pass and met up with a fire road. It wasn't meant to be a real trail, but I didn't care anymore. I wanted out. I moved fast that whole day, barely ate, drank only when I needed to. My legs were sore, and my knees ached from the downhill sections, but I pushed hard. I kept checking behind me. I never saw anything, but that feeling wouldn't go away, like I was being followed just out of sight. I made it to the fire road just before sunset. It was overgrown, barely used, but I followed it. I walked until full dark and then another hour with my headlamp before stopping. I didn't set up the tent that night, just rolled out my bag in a shallow dip by the road and tried to sleep. My body hurt. My mind was fried. I told myself I'd be back at the car the next day. But in the middle of the night, I woke up. The moon was out. I could see shapes in the trees. And right there, across the road, someone was standing. A dark shape, human, still, facing me. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched. And it watched me. I don't know how long it lasted. A minute, 10. I lost track of time. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And then, slowly, the figure turned and walked into the trees. Not fast, just gone. I didn't sleep again. At dawn, I got up and walked. I didn't stop. Not for food. Not for water. I made it back to the trailhead just before noon. My car was still there. The other car was gone. When I got home, I reported what I'd seen. The broken tent, the boot prints, the campsites. I didn't mention the figure at the end. I didn't think they'd believe that, but I gave the GPS coordinates and everything I'd found. A ranger called me a few days later, said they'd checked the sites, said they didn't find anything unusual, no signs of struggle, no missing person reports that matched the area. That was it. I still hike, but I stay on marked trails now. No more remote loops, no more solo bushwhacking, because whatever was out there that week, it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a ghost either. It was someone who knew the woods better than me, someone who stayed just out of sight, someone who didn't want to be found. And I think I barely got away before they made sure I wasn't.